When Will Harris's dad started using ammonium nitrate fertilizer on his farm in 1946, he had no idea he was destroying the microscopic flora and fauna on the land that are necessary for maintaining healthy topsoil. So after 50 years, he moved to a farming system that's not only organic, but regenerates the soil by emulating nature's own processes while concentrating on animal welfare and restoring rural economics. In today's episode of the Nutrition Heretic podcast, we learn about the inaccuracies of labels such as organic and grass-fed, as well as how Harris's smart farming methods are helping to restore his 150-year-old family farm into a thriving farm for the future.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
If you're still confused about what to eat and not getting the results you thought you'd get by going organic, go to nutritionheretic.com and download the shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague for free. The shit list details what health food companies want you to believe about the crap they peddle and why the real foods they're meant to replace are far better. Stop letting big health food dump all over you and download the shit list today.
Fat is bad for you.
I just pop a pill and I'm fine.
Meat is murder.
It's time for bad food punishment. It's time for real nourishment. It's time for the Nutrition Heretic.
The following program is provided as information only and may not be construed as medical or health advice. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any disease. No action or inaction should be taken solely on the basis of the information provided here. Please consult with a licensed healthcare professional or doctor on any matter relating to your health and well-being. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Nutrition Heretic. My name is Adrienne Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic, and I wanted to talk today about last week, my visit to the farmer's market. This woman goes up to one of the farmers and is she's asking about his eggs. You know, what are these eggs that you're selling? Are they organic? And she keeps harping on this organic label. Are they organic? Are they organic? And he says, well, they're out on pasture. They're eating this, bugs and, grasses, but we do supplement. And because we live in Hawaii, the feed is not 100% organic. It's, basically what he feels the market will bear. The eggs that he was selling were about $6 a dozen, I believe. And, I'll just put it this way. The cost of the organic feed is double that. So the woman says, oh, no, I'm not going to buy those. I only eat organic and I raised chickens and they have to be organic. And it was a little bit laughable because she didn't look like she was in the best of health and she, was more than just a little overweight. So to have this kind of, angry, staunch, I know what it is. I know what's good. And there's only one way to crack this nut. It was a little bit funny. Now, I do obviously like to eat organic when I can. However, sometimes I do feel that I have to cut my losses. Would I rather a chicken egg that has been fed a little non-organic feed and mostly bugs and on grass? Personally, I would say I would take that over a supermarket egg any day of the week. If I could get the egg to be fed organically as well, all the better. But sometimes I feel that, yes, I have to suck it up for fear of making myself crazy. So with that said, today's guest is Will Harris. He's a 5th generation farmer at White Oak Pastures, and they raise 5 red meat animal species and 5 poultry species on pasture, and they're hand butchered on a 150-year-old family farm. The farm also engages in furthering animal welfare, regenerative land stewardship, and rural economics. Will, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Adrian. Glad to be here.
And by the way, I love your accent. Might I say? I'm from New York. And I had Southern neighbors, but they didn't sound like you.
Well, I'm glad you like my accent. It's the only one I've got.
I've got a lot because my parents are Jamaican, so I do a little bit of a Jamaican accent sometimes.
Yeah. I was interested in your story about the eggs. The USDA certified organic standard is a pretty good standard for vegetable production or plant production. But when it was applied to animal agriculture, it was not the best application in the world. An example of that is, you can buy organic eggs that literally come from industrial laying operations that are simply fed organic feed.
Yes,
So
exactly.
Your story was well placed.
Right. Well, and that's exactly what I want to, one of the many things I want to talk to you about today, which is that people get blinded by this organic label, but organic industrial is not necessarily what people think. It's not the quality that people think they're getting. So when explain to me, actually, I'm going to jump to what was going to be my 10th question on my list here, but explain to us what organic means in terms of, do people know what they're getting when they get organic? At one point, I remember hearing that organic meant that only 90% needed to be organic. The rest could be just mystery product, whether it's heavy metals or what have you. What does organic mean in terms of that label? And then how do people possibly get duped by that label?
The U.S. organic standard, USDA organic standard, is a very long, very explicit, very complicated standard that you can go online and read if you've got 2 or 3 days to spend doing that. It's been added to and changed and amended. But it does, particularly in animal agriculture, allow for many practices that would fly in the face of what the consumer typically thinks they're getting when they buy organic.
Exactly.
I'm not here to be critical of USDA or certified organic. My farm is USDA certified organic.
Right.
My only point is reading a label is a really poor way of determining what's in your food. Labeling laws have been written in ways that are very vague, very ambiguous. It's very difficult to just read the label and know what you're getting. There's the local food movement really caught traction and has continued to have traction. And I believe that that's because the best way of knowing what you're buying is to know your farmer or know something about your farmer. The local food movement came to mean within a certain radius or within the state or within the county. Really, I think the local food movement is knowing who your farmer is and something about their production practices.
Right.
And if that person is your neighbor, that's the best way.
Absolutely.
But if not, there are other ways of giving that transparency.
Yes, for sure. And, this is one of the things that I always tell people, which is that when you go and talk to a farmer about how they raise their food, I know very few of them that are just complete yes men. More often than not, if they don't want to grow their food the way that you want it produced, they will kind of mock you. Actually, they'll make fun of you. They'll say, "Oh, well, we can't do that. That's impossible. You can't raise peaches that way, or you can't raise chickens that way." And they're more inclined to take kind of a smug approach towards dealing with you than to actually lie. So I don't know if that's something that you've seen in the industry.
Well, and yes, and I think that the story you told also, the lady wanted. She wanted it pastured and she wanted organic feed and she wants maybe something else and something else and something else. And that's fine. Certainly she can choose whatever list of stipulations she wants to select for what she's paying her money for.
Right.
And all the farmer can do is just be honest and transparent about what his production system is, and then let those people choose.
Right.
The enemy of people like us, farmers who raise food in a manner that has a very high level of animal welfare and a high level of environmental sustainability, the biggest enemy we have is multinational industrial companies, food companies that greenwash their product.
Yes.
That use these vague, ambiguous labels and hire very talented wordsmiths to talk about their production system to make it sound as though it's what the consumer wants. And that devalues the products that people like us produce that are really doing what we say we're doing.
Absolutely. And this is another thing that I've noticed as well, as far as people getting very distracted by that organic label is, for example, I was down in DC at one point and well, it's not down for me anymore, but I used to live in New Jersey. So I was in DC once and we went to some little cute town and we stopped in a type of deli type shop, and they had strawberries, and then they had a bunch of boxed organic, crackers and cereals and totally just heavily processed items. I can't even call them food, to be honest. And the person who was with me said, well, those strawberries? Oh, strawberries, they're the worst on pesticides. You can't, And then so she picks up this box of basically cardboard inside cardboard. and she buys that because it's labeled organic. To my mind, I'd rather clean the strawberries as best I can and kind of suck it up that it's not organic and eat that than to eat this dried up straw in a box. I don't know. How do you feel about something like that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe that the more food is processed, the further it gets from the food that we as a population evolved eating.
Right.
We, and by we, I mean American farmers, my father's generation and my generation, are the people that industrialized, centralized, and commoditized food production. And that only started really post-World War II.
Right.
So we've only been eating this industrial type farm products for about 70 years. That's not very long.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, give me, what do you, okay, you have the USDA organic label. What are your practices? Because when we talk about, regenerative agriculture, what does that mean to you? Like, how do you regenerate this depleted soil?
Okay, well, you asked several questions there, and I don't know exactly where to start, but let me try it like this. So the three legs to our production system is high animal welfare. Mm-hmm. As you said, we produce 5 red meat species and 5 poultry species. High animal welfare. High environmental sustainability, which is the regenerative management side of it. And then the third one is just fair rural economics, which is another long discussion. But in all things we do, we endeavor to emulate nature, and in doing that, support those 3 legs. If we talked about animal welfare, our farm is the only farm in the United States that has step 5+ rating from Global Animal Partnership, GAP, the Whole Foods rating system. Is what people think of it as.
Okay.
Yeah. We're the only farm in the country that has a step 5+ in all 4 species that they have standards for. We're also animal welfare approved, also certified humane, 3 different certifiers that all focus on animal welfare.
Right.
All 3 of them have big books on what comprises good animal welfare. But really, at the end of the day, good animal welfare means the farm creates a system in which the animal can express instinctive behavior.
Mm.
Cows were born to roam and graze. Hogs were born to root and wallow. Chickens were born to scratch and peck. And in industrial farming, those animals are deprived the expression of those basic instincts.
Right.
So we can talk forever and print big books like our certifiers have on good animal welfare, but that's the cowboy down and dirty on it. If you enjoy watching the animals, it's probably pretty good animal welfare.
Right.
Nobody wants to watch animals, chickens in a battery cage, hogs in a gestation crate, cows in a feedlot. But if you enjoy watching it, you probably got pretty good animal welfare.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So, that actually was, one of my questions was, what does that even mean, animal welfare? And it's good to know because I think there is a lot of, political correctness, to be honest, of people thinking that just because you're raising animals or I'm eating animals, that there's nothing humane about the entire system. I could go on about people having cats in their homes, not being able to express their their natural instincts the way they might do if they were outdoors. But that's another discussion for another time. So when we look at these different forms of these methods of farming, I should say, we've got things like organic, we've got biodynamic, biologically integrated, aquaponics, cultivation of indigenous microorganisms. Which one do you feel that you subscribe to the most and benefits the land the most?
Good. That's a good question. Have you ever heard of Alan Savory?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Good. Congratulations.
Actually, he's how we found you.
Well, I'm very pleased that you have that. But for your listeners, let me just say, please Google Savory Institute. I believe that Savory Institute has regenerative agriculture figured out better than anyone else that I'm aware of, and I've dug pretty deep in that well. So we are a savory regenerative hub. There are, I think, 24 hubs on 6 continents. I know there are 3 east of the Mississippi.
Okay.
My farm, White Oak Pastures in Georgia, one in upstate New York, and one in Michigan. And regenerative agriculture is basically using animal impact and multi-species plant populations to regenerate the soil. And it's a really beautiful system.
Right. And my understanding is that he does nothing more than just throw the animals out on the land and let them do their thing. Well, I mean, that sounds a little more crass than it probably is, but that really there's this trend towards, well, we can't have, the animals are destroying the planet because we're raising them all for food, and it's unsustainable. They're creating methane gas, yada yada yada. Problems, skull and crossbones everywhere. But what you folks are talking about is integrating animals in the restoration of the land.
Yeah, absolutely. I would maintain that the planet won't ever be restored without animal impact. Animal impact is what was a driving force in creating the Earth that we have today. And to say the predator-prey relationship, it is not just throwing the animals out there. That would be a crass understatement. It's much more complicated than that.
Right.
But it does involve, again, use the word emulating nature.
Right.
The way the way the Earth evolved was grazing animals, harvesting the grass that's grown, predators keeping the animals moving so that the land was grazed, because land can be overrested.
Yes.
But the predators moved it so they wouldn't be overgrazed. So,
Right.
there's I don't know how deep you want to get into this, but there's basically 4 systems going on every acre of land that's not under pavement or buildings every day.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the energy cycle. A certain amount, the sun sends a certain amount of radiation, and if the land is managed right, there's a lot of different varieties of photosynthesizing plants out there harvesting that energy.
Right.
Not bare ground or parking lots or building, bouncing it back up into the atmosphere, but photosynthesizing plants turning that radiation energy into sugar and protein that can be utilized. There's the water cycle. Every acre of land receives a certain amount of precipitation. 54 inches on my farm in Georgia, less than 2 inches in Death Valley, but a certain amount of water. And the water cycle needs to absorb that water so it doesn't run off and create floods.
Yes.
And then green growing plants are the best way to utilize that moisture. Then there's the mineral cycle that involves taking carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases out of the air and sequestering them in the soil. We're talking about the opposite of this business of animals, flatulence, destroying. It's the opposite. If it's done, animal agriculture done right actually sequesters carbon in the soil where it needs to be. It gets it out of the air, out of the atmosphere, where it doesn't need to be.
Right.
And then there's the harvest of that, and by which you can use animals. That's a Cliff Notes version of a 2-day conversation.
Right. Yeah. And you just gave me about 17 questions just in that statement alone, because immediately what comes to mind is the drought in California. You're not in California, but at face value, what do you see could have been done to remediate that, to not make it the horrible impact that it's had on people, if anything?
Well, I'm not a meteorologist, so I wouldn't.
But in terms of your system of farming, because I know a lot of the farmers were clearly suffering, and that may be because the water is being diverted to grow almonds, for example. The little bit of rainfall they were getting. But is there anything in the system you talk about that protects against that level of drought that they experienced?
Well, yes, there's a lot of things. I just talked about one of the 4 systems being the water system, and not just the way the farmers farm, but the fact that we have I almost said destroyed. That's probably not quite right. It's certainly done horrible damage to the water system through industrial agriculture. I can give you many examples, but just 2 right offhand. Very different, but and I can give you many more. The organic matter in the land on my farm is over 5%. The organic matter on the farm next door is less than one half of 1%. So what that means is and my land is covered with growing plants and litter, the other farm is tilled up 2 or 3 times a year to the naked ground, naked earth.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get, and in my part of the world on the Gulf Coast, we get very hard thunder showers. We may get 2 inches of rain in an hour. And when that happens, you can stand on the downhill side of my pastures, and very little water will be coming off the pasture. And what does come off is not muddy.
Okay.
On the field right next door, it'll be a torrent coming down, and it'll, the water's so muddy you can't see. It looks like a milkshake. You can't see through it.
So basically the land doesn't want to hold on to that water.
Well, you destroy the water system. Let's say you destroy the Earth's ability to absorb as much water as it should.
Mm-hmm.
So let's, and we can talk about those things a lot, but let's go to another extreme. You hear so much about floods, and remember when the first Europeans came to this country, one of the largest industries was beaver trapping.
Yes.
Beavers are probably the best flood control you could possibly imagine, because they build leaky dams everywhere they can find running water.
Mm-hmm.
So when more water falls than the land can absorb, it fills up a beaver pond, and of course it fills up many beaver ponds before it gets down to a place that is a potential flood.
Right.
And then that water slowly leaks down. If there's another huge rain, it fills the ponds back up. So it's like a world-class buffer against flood. So, and we can talk about many other things, but when you destroy the water cycle, guess what? You're going to have water problems.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's not rocket science, yet it seems that our scientists are so hell-bent on overriding nature that they forget to respect the signals that nature is giving us at any given time.
Well, I think I can explain a little bit of that to you if you want me to.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So, do you know the difference in complicated and complex?
Yes.
Okay. Can I say it?
Yes, you can. I actually describe this to people all the time that, that the body is complex. It's not complicated. It's just, it has certain requirements, but you don't need to complicate it.
Well, no, that's exactly right. The body is complex. This computer is complicated.
Right.
And the defining difference is if one component in this computer goes awry, that son of a bitch quits working. It don't work no more.
Exactly.
If one component of your body ceases to work, unless it's your heart or brain, the rest of your body will make adjustments.
Homeostasis, we like to call that.
And it'll continue to operate.
Yes.
Well, so much of science is reductionist science. And reductionist science works really well on complicated systems or instruments. It works really poorly on complex systems. So reductionist science gave us tools to use in one of the most complex systems there in the world, and that's like a farm. A farm is horribly complex.
Yeah.
Or horrible is not the right word, but incredibly complex.
Yes.
So, they gave us chemical fertilizers and pesticides and hormone implants and many other GMOs and many other tools that
complicate the picture.
That create a desired effect, but they have incredible unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
And the unintended consequences come from the fact that it's a complex system, and there was no way of anticipating exactly what those consequences would be using reductionist science.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And this is something that's obviously concerning a lot of people, because it's on the one hand, it's easy to simplify something that you don't really do firsthand. So I'm sure you get people all the time who kind of poo-poo what you do, or, they kind of look down like, oh, it's so easy. Why do you charge so much? Or whatever their beef is with what you do. However, it's it shows their ignorance about what you do, because it's only by doing that you understand the complexity of it.
Yeah, that's part of the human equation. I mean, I can look at what other people do that requires a lot of training and experience and knowledge. And, in my naivety, I can say, why don't you just blank?
Right.
And the same is true with other people looking at what we do. And then that's just the human condition. We can't help that.
Yes, and what's interesting though is listening to someone like you, because you have the experience, you understand how these different cycles work, and you know how to successfully farm for the future. Meanwhile, we have the ADMs and Monsantos of the world who look down on what you do and think that it's not scientific enough. Since when is anything not science? And that's what you do is science, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But like you said, there's reductionist science, and then there's, how things actually work. Okay. So, what I want to know is, when did you decide, because you were a conventional farmer before, what was the turning point in your head where you said, this isn't working anymore, or I need to start paying attention so that you're not like your neighbor?
Yeah, I've had that question before, and I wish I had a better answer. I wish I'd seen a burning bush or God had spoken to me. But the truth is, I graduated from the University of Georgia in 1976. My degree was in animal science. And I've been raised by my father, who was the best industrial cattleman I'd ever known. And I learned industrial beef production at the University of Georgia. And I came home and really loved it. I was really good at it. My temperament and personality are very linear, alpha, male, Western, more is better. So it suited me very well. Mm-hmm. And I farmed that way for 20 years and was successful. I made money. We lived well. But every year, especially towards the end, it was less and less enjoyable for me. And the reason is I was becoming disillusioned with it and later disgusted with it, because I was starting to recognize the unintended consequences. And I don't know exactly how that happened or why that happened, but the unintended consequences that my father never noticed and that I didn't notice for 20 years gradually became apparent and then obvious, and then all too obvious to me. And I started making changes very subtly, and we're still making changes. And that was 20 years ago. For 20 years, we've been making changes. It's a journey, not a destination.
Right, right. So, it was, when you say unintended consequences, not totally sure I understand.
Okay, I got that for you. So I can give you a lot of examples. My favorite one is my father told me in 1946 he went to a meeting, farmer meeting, in our little town of Bluffton here, and a salesman was sponsoring the meeting, fish fry, barbecue, whatever it was, and everybody ate supper, and when the farmers were ready to leave, he had two 200-pound bags of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. Mm-hmm. And he gave every farmer a little brown paper sack with 10 pounds or so in it, and asked they go home and get out in the pasture and pour the ammonium nitrate out in a pattern, a straight line or a circle, or write your name or whatever you wanted to do. And then put water on it, wet it, hose it, and then leave it alone for 3 days and come back and look at it. And my father did that. And when he came back 3 days later, the grass was just exponentially taller and greener and better looking than the grass that didn't get the ammonium nitrate.
Right.
So, he said, I want all my land to look like that. And from 1946 until 2002 or 3 or 4, either he or I applied ammonium nitrate fertilizer 1 or 2 or 3 times a year to every acre of land that we have. And because we wanted that desired effect. But what he couldn't see in 1946, and I couldn't see till I learned how to look, is that applying that ammonium nitrate fertilizer to that virgin earth oxidized the organic matter, the carbon in the land that had been forming since the dinosaurs were here.
Right.
It killed slowly, but killed the microscopic flora and fauna that fed the land, lived in symbiotic relationship with the plants to feed them. And it was doing horrible things, but in the long run, but getting a fantastic short-term effect.
Right.
So that's the unintended consequence. And we can talk about unintended consequences in animals and other things as well.
Right. Yeah. And I'm, what I keep thinking is that right now I'm learning something called the Korean natural farming method. I don't know if you are familiar with it at all. And, it's so harmonious with the land and cultivating the very things that this ammonium nitrate was killing. So it works on the principle of cultivating essentially the probiotics in the soil, so that they can flourish and suppress the weeds naturally.
You know, one of the ancient Greeks, I don't remember which one, probably couldn't pronounce it if I did, but one of the ancient Greeks said, for every pestilence that nature sends, she sends the cure.
Absolutely.
But we use these tools like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, hormone implants, antibiotics, and it throws everything out of sync. And then we wonder why we're having this pestilence.
Right. You're preaching to the choir here. So tell me about the labels of grass-fed and pastured, because I know that your animals are out on pasture. I think most people, when they hear about grass-fed, or actually, here's another one, cage-free, when they're buying their chickens and eggs, right? Cage-free, what does that mean? What does pastured or grass-fed mean? Can any of those labels be misleading?
All of the above, yes. So then that gets back to what we said earlier, or what I said earlier about reading a label is a horrible way of determining what you're really getting. I am on the board of the American Grass-Fed Association, and we have a definition of grass-fed that you can look on our website and see. You can see the standards, the production standards that you've got to maintain to have that label. But USDA defined grass-fed several years ago. And basically, under the USDA standard for grass-fed, you can raise cows in a confinement feedlot, give them hormone implants and subtherapeutic antibiotics, and call it grass-fed as long as you feed them grass and not grain in the feedlot. Right. You harvest the grass in haylage or some other form. Cage-free basically has no significant attribute connected to it. Pastured is what I call my production system, and that's because USDA has not defined it. So it hadn't been screwed up yet.
Right.
But again, it would be so nice if there was this really succinct labeling system that you could look and know, but it's just not that easy. There's too much money in the food business, so too many people are going to create pretty words that make the consumer see a production system in their minds. That's probably not happening in the pasture, in the field. No one, on my farm, we built a restaurant in part, so on-farm restaurant, so people could come to see us and eat and see what we do. We later built lodging. We got cabins on the farm, so people can come and stay and see what we do. We've spent a lot of, we do all those verifications I mentioned. I mentioned the Global Animal Partnership, Certified Humane, Animal Welfare Approved, also American Grass-Fed Association. The farm is certified organic, although the meat and poultry is not. Savory, Hub. We try to get all the little merit badges that we can, And I think that goes a lot further towards telling the consumer painting a more accurate picture of the production system, where there's nothing as good as coming and looking, or, get on the website and look, and you can tell a lot about what people are doing. Just studying the website, but you can't just study the label.
Right. Well, could you, I think some of our listeners may not really understand how these labels are misleading. So, for example, my understanding is that when they say a chicken is cage free, they're still in a barn, and they're still wing to wing, and they're still eating each other's feces, but they're just not in a cage. They're in a barn where they're locked up until the last day when they open the door, and the chicken is like, I'm not going out there.
Yeah, well, you could say, I live in Georgia, and we have it's the number one industrial broiler production state in the union. And, the way broilers are raised, it's one big old long house with 25,000 or so birds in there. And there's not a cage in there, but the house is a cage.
Right.
Free range was bastardized badly when they basically said you can cut a door in the house, and if the chickens, that makes them free range, although the only option they got is step outside on a little concrete porch.
Right.
It goes on and always will. But you've got uninformed consumers, a lot of them that just don't care. And then you've got another class of consumer that kind of wants to be lied to make them feel a little better about it. And then you've got a higher class of consumer in terms of sophistication.
Right.
And these are the people that really want to know what's going on out there.
Right.
And those are my customers. Everybody gets to spend their food dollar on whatever they want to spend it on. But, 90% of those people are not my customers.
Right. Yeah. And just to go back to that label again, I was also reminded as you were speaking of a farmer who, I forget if he used grass-fed or pastured for his chickens. And he doesn't know this, but I saw how his chickens are really raised. Yeah, he showed me the ones where he let them out on the grass. I actually found out that they're in black tents that do not move and are actually pretty small, with 50 to 100 chickens in them. They look like row covers for your vegetables. And these tiny little black tents, so they're not getting sunlight. They're crammed in there, and yeah, they're on grass, but they're far from thriving.
Yeah, and that's the reason that transparency and people, having the gates open so people can come and look is important. Absolutely.
And I remember when I asked him about his animals before I even found out, the backstory of what's going on there. And he was very vague. You can kind of tell when someone, nobody gets into this kind of farming just because they woke up one morning and thought about it. You don't make that kind of investment willy-nilly. It doesn't just happen that way. There's someone who wants to do it right. There's a commitment there, and there's an engagement and a conversation, and like you say, the transparency. Come up to the farm. Why don't you see how we're doing it? Why don't you come and take a look? If you have questions, we can answer them right there. So, and then that was actually another thing I wanted to ask you about is the whole vegetarian feed. Again, going back to animal welfare, how does that work in? Because that's another buzzword that people latch onto. Oh, I only eat animals that have been fed. The bad cow. That's what it was. Animals being fed to animals. What's the deal with the vegetarian feed, and why do we or do we not want that?
Well, as I said earlier, we aspire to emulate nature. And I'll say that our best emulation is imperfect, and our worst emulation needs a lot of improvement. but we're continually striving to do a better and better job emulating nature. And I brought that back up because there are farm animals that are vegetarians. Cows, sheep, goats, rabbits. There are farm animals that are very carnivorous or omnivorous. Hogs, chicken, or poultry in general, hogs and poultry in general. So, if you don't think that my hogs will eat a snake or a bird, ground birds, get in the bird nest, whatever they can get. I mean, they're very carnivorous with things like that. Same with the poultry. They eat bugs, they eat worms. Nobody wants to think about it, but if they find a nest of baby mice, they'll eat them.
Right.
They're just meat eaters, and it's disingenuous for we feed only vegetarian feeds, but the animals eat whatever they when they're out on pasture, they're getting animal protein, and it does them good.
Right.
Now, it is true that it goes against nature to trick a herbivore into eating animal protein, and that's what's said to have caused the BSE or mad cow disease, is feeding animal tissue back to cattle.
Right.
And that's just wrong. I mean, cattle, or sheep, goats, they will not graze near a dead animal. They don't want to eat animal protein.
Right. Right. I mean, they do get incidental insects when they're eating their grasses, but that's not like what we consider animals.
Right. They didn't intend to.
Right.
They didn't choose to eat those worms. It's just,
Right. But, I mean, they do, and I guess in that sense, they do sort of get an animal protein, but not what we're thinking about when we think of those. And I don't know, did you know Mark Purdy, who did the British farmer who had done the studies on BSE?
No, I've heard the name, but I don't know that.
Yeah, he was, I had seen him speak at the Weston Price conference some years ago, and it was very interesting. Unfortunately, he's since died, but he had some very kind of damning evidence against some pesticide programs that were run in the UK that actually are more likely to have been the cause of the BSE outbreak.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It was apparently some type of pesticide, it was to kill warble fly, and they forced all these farmers to put it slather it on the backs of their cattle, and this is my understanding, at least the way I recall it, and and he and several other organic farmers said, well, we can't be organic if we're going to put that stuff on our cows, and none of their cows got the BSE, but. So in any case, I want to actually have two questions. One is my question, and one is from a listener, which I'm not sure you'll be able to answer that because I'm not even 100% sure what it means. But I want you to tell me a little bit more about the importance of the family farm and how that plays into rural economics.
Well, of course, whether it's owned by a family specifically, I don't know. It so happens been the same our family for 150 years. But rural economics was impacted horribly by centralization. It used to be that in every rural town, you had a small abattoir where the animals were slaughtered. You had a little flour mill, a corn grist mill, probably a bakery, a little local food system that fed the population, and there was a lot of diversity in the production because that's the way nature works. The post-World War II centralization, industrialization, commoditization disrupted all that. And we started growing just about all of our vegetables in California. That's a little overstated, but it's kind of right. We started growing just about all our milk in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin. We started growing just about all our cotton, from the Mississippi to Georgia, kind of little belt down there. All our soybeans and corn. It became very centralized. We raised cattle in 50 states. We shipped them to what we used to call the Southern State Feeding Area. That's expanded a little bit from that. And then, of course, there were huge slaughterhouses there, huge cereal production factories, huge everything. So what that did is it literally caused there to be no reason to have small rural towns anymore.
Right.
And, it would be hard for me to justify adding huge amounts to the cost of goods to have those small little towns. But again, unintended consequences. And when you build a meat plant, say a beef slaughter plant, that kills 400 head of cattle per hour for 16 hours a day, there's no way to staff that plant with local people. Right. So you wind up bringing in huge numbers of immigrant people, many of whom are not legal, and gets that kind of situation started. When you have a recall, when something goes wrong at that plant, and you have a recall because there's an E. coli outbreak, it doesn't include hundreds of pounds of meat. It includes millions of pounds of meat.
Mm-hmm.
From a pollution perspective, from many perspectives, these super efficient centralized plants that caused food to be obscenely cheap had horrible unintended consequences. And one of these unintended consequences is rural towns slipped into oblivion.
Right.
The town that I'm in right now, Bluffton, near my farm, had 400 people in 1900. It's only got 100 people today.
What? That's nuts. And those people, the 400, let's say, how many of those would you say maybe were actually farmers at that time?
Well, in 1900,
right.
It was a purely agrarian economy, as it is today. So every person here was a farmer or served a farmer, the medical doctor, the bank, whatever. There was no economy other than the farm economy here in 1900, and there's just about no economy here today other than the ag economy. But the ag economy has, in industrial agriculture, has very little need of the small town and services. One farmer with 3 employees can farm thousands of acres of land.
Right.
Now, the method of farming might be not very good for the land, but they can do it.
Right. And what you say has so many implications. I don't want to get political today, but, when we look at people complaining, about immigrants and so on and so forth, I'm thinking to myself, well, how much do you want to pay for that tomato? And I'm not saying that this is justified. I'm saying that we need to start, if we want to have a certain, let's say, standard of living and we want to make sure more Americans have jobs, I think it's only that we have to understand where the money is coming from. It has to come from somewhere. So, do you ever watch I Love Lucy?
Yeah.
Do you remember the chicken and egg episode where Lucy wants to raise chickens and she ends up with a bunch of eggs in her shirt and they smash all over her shirt? But anyway, in that episode, she says something about charging, I think it was 50 or I think it was 60 cents a dozen for eggs. And this is, we're talking 1955 or something like that, 1950, somewhere around there. People complain today if they spend more than $3 a dozen. And you look at the difference in the cost of a house, the cost of a car, the cost of so many things that, clothes. We need to make sure that our farmers are getting paid fair wages.
Well, I've mentioned several times, I'm going to say it one more time. We industrialized, commoditized, and centralized. Mm-hmm. And that was done. It wasn't a horrible conspiracy theory movement. It was done to make food cheap and abundant and, quote, safe, end quote. And it was wildly successful. It made food wastefully cheap and wastefully abundant, obscenely cheap, and safe, maybe not in all senses of the word.
I think of safe as just sterile, not necessarily safe, but almost devoid of any energy at all, as far as I'm concerned.
It's, it was very successful, but it had those unintended consequences we keep talking about.
Right. So I'm going to let you go, but I do have one question, and I'm not totally sure that this is up your alley. It's from a woman named Laura Childs. She and her daughter have written several books on high-fat, low-carbohydrate dieting, and through her journey, she's become much more interested in sustainable foods and quality foods, and knowing the difference between something that's processed in a box that promises something and promises an end result, and the real foods that you're raising. But she has a question about sprouts and something called tenders, which I've never heard that term. She says they're 6-inch plants grown in a medium, and she'd like to start growing her own through the winter. She lives in Canada. What features should she shop for in a growing medium for optimum nutrition? And I know that we talked before we got on air about you don't really like to go into the whole nutrition side of things per se, but is there a good strategy for growing a good medium that she can feel comfortable with growing really anything, I would think, not just these tenders?
Well, you're right. That's completely outside what I think of as my fields of expertise. The only thing I can say is that, in the extreme, the most industrial form of agriculture that I can think of is hydroponic farming, where plants are grown in basically a solution of chemical water and a solution of chemicals that reductionist science has determined that plant needs. And in that scenario, when you eat a carrot or rutabaga or stalk of celery, all you're getting is the biologically transformed chemicals that science put in the solution.
Right.
If that plant grew in a natural, organic medium that was teeming with microbial life, just intuitively, I got to believe that carrot or rutabaga or stalk of celery would be better for you.
Right.
No, I'm telling you what I think and not what I know, but that sure makes a lot of sense to me.
Right. How does she emulate that in her soil? How can someone who's kind of just a backyard farmer, gardener, emulate a good growing medium? That's, is it going to the store and buying some peat moss and sand and, working all these things into the soil she already has? I have my own opinions because I do the Korean method of cultivating the indigenous microorganisms. In your opinion, is there something she can do? Is it chicken manure, or I don't know. Is there something that she can do to really harness that type of activity in the soil that you do on your farm?
What I think I would probably do is I would go to the most undisturbed soil that I could find. That might be in the backside of your backyard. It might be in a graveyard that was nearby. It might be in, just someplace that's been left alone and nothing is pristine. You got to know that up front.
Right.
Nothing is. But go to a place that would have the most undisturbed soil that I could get my hands on. And then I would start a very aggressive composting operation, composting all the food waste or any other waste that you have. And I'd feed that soil with that composted waste. And I think you'd have a pretty damn good growing medium if you did that.
Right, yeah.
I'd rather have that than anything I could buy from a, multinational garden production company.
Awesome. Yeah. And that reminds me that in the Korean method, one of the things that they suggest to start cultivating these microorganisms is to go to basically four corners of your own garden, take some soil, and then go to places of different elevations. And grab some soil there. Go up the closest hill or mountain and grab some soil from there and bring some of those microorganisms back to your place. And we actually did an episode on bokashi. I'm not sure if you know what that is. But it's an aggressive composting system that takes less than 5 weeks to compost your food waste, including bones and blood and all that stuff too.
We have I think we're the only farm in the country that has a USDA inspected red meat abattoir or slaughterhouse and a USDA approved poultry abattoir or slaughterhouse on the farm. And we have a huge waste stream coming off of those two slaughterhouses.
Mm-hmm.
And we compost all that waste. The waste would be feathers, eviscerate, bones from the cutting room, heads, gut fill, ... We grind it up, got a big old grinder, and we take it to a remote part of the farm, and we use what's called the Cornell University Dead Animal Composting System, which is we make a lasagna out of.
That's a great description.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I didn't think of it that way before, but yeah, if it's similar to bokashi, then it's kind of a parfait of some sort.
Yeah, that's right. Carbaceous material, that dead animal material, carbaceous, and we let it sit for a year. Then we stir it with our front end loader and let it sit for another year. Then we spread it out on our pastures that are recovering, which is like when the animals are not growing, not on it. We've already grazed it off. And I think we make the best compost in the world, and the pastures respond to it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I think that our listeners are also enjoying this because many of them, like I said at the beginning, they're confused about a lot of these labels. They want to know what they're getting, and they want to understand how their choice, particularly those of us who do eat meat and will continue to eat meat, how we can do that more sustainably, how we can do that more responsibly, not only to our families, but also to the animals, the land, and our local economies. Thank you so very much, Will. And again, Will Harris was our guest heretic today, and he is the owner of White Oak Pastures at whiteoakpastures.com. You can go there and learn all about his farm. Apparently, you can visit his restaurant and stay the night.
You can, and I invite all of you to do so.
Thank you so much. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Appreciate being on.
Alrighty.
The Nutrition Heretic Podcast is a production of Savor the Journey, LLC. Our audio editor is Nikola Popovich. Our podcast manager is Crystal McLean, and our operations manager is Linda Hansen. I'm your host, Adrian Hugh, the Nutrition Heretic. You can find us at nutritionheretic.com, where you can download the Nutrition Heretic's free shit list of 7 health foods to avoid like the plague. You can also listen to previous episodes at nutritionheretic.com/podcast. Be sure to like us on social media for updates. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/nutritionheretic and on Twitter at NutriHeretic. Contact us with show ideas, questions, or if you just want to be a guest. And don't forget to rate our podcast on iTunes and Stitcher. Thanks.